He handed her the divorce papers with the same casual indifference he used to pass the salt. After 10 years of marriage, Gregory Stanton decided his wife Catherine was an outdated model ready to be traded in for someone younger, sleeker, his secretary. He smirked as he planned his new life funded by the generous settlement he was sure to get. He saw Catherine as a quiet, unassuming artist, a woman he had long since outgrown. What he forgot, what he so foolishly overlooked, was her last name, Vance. He had married the daughter of Harrison Vance, a man who didn't just play the game of high finance. He owned the entire board. This isn't just a story of a divorce. It's the story of how a titan of industry taught his arrogant ex-son-in-law the true brutal meaning of the word bankrupt. The silence in their sprawling Upper East Side brownstone had become a living entity. It breathed in the spaces between Gregory Stanton's clipped one-word answers and Catherine Vance's fading attempts at conversation. For the past year, the silence had grown feeding on missed dinners, late nights at the office, and the ever-present cloying scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, a cheap but persistent gardenia that clung to the lapels of his Brioni suits. Catherine traced the rim of her wine glass, the deep red of the Merlot, a stark contrast to the sterile white marble of their kitchen island. It was their 10th anniversary. Or more accurately, it was the 10th anniversary of the day they had signed their marriage certificate. The celebration, like their communication, was non-existent. Greg was late. Again. Just closing a massive deal, Kate. You wouldn't understand the pressure he had texted 3 hours ago. The condescension was a familiar sting. In the early years, he had admired her work as a budding architect, her eye for sustainable design and community-focused spaces. Now he called it her little hobby, a quaint pastime for a woman who didn't have to worry about a real career. He had forgotten that her little hobby had won the prestigious Pritzker Architecture Prize nomination 5 years ago, an achievement he had dismissed as a fluke. Her career was built on creating foundations, on understanding the load-bearing walls and the structural integrity required to make something last. She saw the cracks in their own foundation with a painful clarity. They were no longer hairline fractures. They were gaping fissures, threatening to bring the whole facade crashing down. The source of the poison had a name, Jessica Thorne, his executive assistant. Greg had hired her a year ago, praising her efficiency and go-getter attitude. Catherine had met her once at a company gala. Jessica was all sharp angles and a predatory smile, her eyes lingering on Greg a moment too long. She had called Catherine Mom, the word dripping with a syrupy feigned respect that felt more like an insult. The evidence had been a slow, insidious trickle. The late-night texts he'd laugh off as urgent work matters. The credit card statements with charges for lunches at intimate French bistros Catherine had never been to. The way he now guarded his phone as if it were a state secret. Catherine wasn't a fool, but she was a romantic, a believer in the vows they had taken. She had tried to talk to him to bridge the chasm that had opened between them, but it was like talking to a brick wall, a handsome, impeccably dressed brick wall. At 10:47 p.m., the front door finally clicked open. Greg strode in, pulling at his silk tie, his face flushed with a triumphant energy that had nothing to do with work. The gardenia scent was stronger than ever. "We did it," he announced, tossing his briefcase onto a leather armchair. "We landed the Oakhaven development contract." "This is it, Kate. This is the big one. Stanton Innovative Designs is going to the next level." He didn't mention their anniversary. He didn't ask where she had been or how her day was. He walked straight to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a generous measure of Macallan 25. Catherine's voice was quiet, almost a whisper against the vastness of the room. "Congratulations, Greg." He took a long swallow of the scotch, his back to her. "This changes everything. No more small-time projects. We're in the major leagues now." She finally looked up from her wine, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. "Does it change us, Greg?" He turned, and for the first time she saw the annoyance in his eyes wasn't veiled. It was raw and impatient. "What is that supposed to mean? I'm out there building an empire for us, and you're asking me cryptic questions." "I'm asking if you're happy," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "If we're happy." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Happiness is a luxury, Kate. Success is a necessity." "I thought you of all people would understand that." "Your father certainly does." The mention of her father, Harrison Vance, was a deliberate jab. Greg had always had a complicated relationship with his father-in-law's immense wealth and power. He was both desperate for his approval and resentful of his shadow. Harrison Vance was a corporate leviathan, the chairman of Vance Global Holdings, a conglomerate with interests in everything from logistics to biotechnology. He was a name that made markets tremble. To Greg, Harrison was the ultimate benchmark of success, a benchmark he was pathologically driven to meet on his own terms. "My father has nothing to do with this," Catherine said steadily. "This is about you and me. This is about your assistant." The name hung in the air between them, unspoken but deafening. Greg's face hardened, his affable mask crumbling away to reveal the cold, hard ambition beneath. He set his glass down with a sharp click. "You're right," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "This is about you and me. And it's over." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. "What? It's over." "Catherine," he repeated, walking towards the grand staircase, already mentally moving on. "I want a divorce. I've been meaning to tell you, but I was waiting for the Oakhaven deal to close. It simplifies things. 10 years of life, love, and shared dreams reduced to a matter of convenient timing. You're leaving me. For her." The question was a choked whisper. Greg paused, his hand on the banister. He didn't even have the decency to deny it. "Jessica understands me. She understands my ambition. She's not content to sit on the sidelines and sketch buildings for non-profits. She wants to be in the arena." He looked at Catherine, and his expression was one of pity. It was the most insulting thing he could have done. "We've just grown apart, Kate. It happens. People change." Catherine stood frozen, her wine glass clutched in her hand. The silence she had been living with for a year suddenly erupted into a deafening roar in her ears. He was throwing her away. He was discarding their life together for a cheaper fare and a bigger contract. He continued up the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours tomorrow," he called down. "Let's try to be civilized about this. I'll be generous, of course. For old time's sake." As he disappeared into their bedroom, the room they had shared for a decade, to pack a bag, Catherine slowly lowered her hand. She looked at the expensive wine, the polished marble, the architect-designed lighting that cast a warm glow over the cold, empty space. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a monument to a lie. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. He thought he was in control. He thought he was the one making all the moves, dictating the terms of their separation. He believed her to be the quiet, gentle artist he could easily set aside. He had forgotten that a foundation, when attacked, relies on its bedrock. And her bedrock was a man named Harrison Vance. In his arrogance, Gregory Stanton hadn't just ended a marriage, he had declared war on an empire. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 50th floor of a midtown skyscraper, the office of Greg's divorce attorney, a shark named Alistair Finch. The view of Central Park was breathtaking, a sea of green and gold under the autumn sun. But Catherine saw none of it. Her world had shrunk to the polished mahogany table and the smug faces of the two men sitting opposite her and her lawyer, a calm, methodical man named Robert Abernathy. Abernathy was her father's man, dispatched the morning after Catherine's tearful late-night call to Harrison. He was in his late 60s, with a mind as sharp as a shard of glass and a loyalty to the Vance family that was absolute. He had reviewed the prenuptial agreement she and Greg had signed a decade ago, an ironclad document drafted by his very own firm. Mr. Stanton's demands are audacious. Abernathy had told her that morning, his tone dry as dust. He seems to be operating under a severe misapprehension of his legal standing. Now, sitting across from that misapprehension in the flesh, Catherine understood. Greg was radiating a confidence that bordered on megalomania. Fresh off his Oakhaven deal, he saw himself as an untouchable titan of industry, a self-made man who had earned his seat at the table. "So let's get down to it." Finch began sliding a leather-bound folder across the table. "Gregory has been more than reasonable in his proposal. In the interest of a swift and amicable resolution, he is not seeking any claim on Catherine's personal trust, which, as we all know, is substantial." He paused, as if expecting gratitude. Abernathy simply stared back, his expression unreadable. Finch cleared his throat and continued. "Gregory will of course be keeping the brownstone. He considers it the primary asset of the marriage, a reflection of his success. He is also requesting 50% of all liquid assets accumulated during the marriage, which includes the joint investment portfolio with Morgan Stanley. And finally, a one-time alimony payment of $5 million to compensate for the emotional distress and the career sacrifices he made to support Catherine's artistic endeavors." Catherine felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rise in her throat. Career sacrifices. He had openly mocked her work for years. He wanted the house she had personally redesigned and renovated, pouring her heart and soul into every detail. He wanted $5 million for the emotional distress of cheating on her with his secretary. Before she could speak, Abernathy held up a hand, a small, subtle gesture. "Mr. Finch, Mr. Stanton." He began, his voice even and calm. "Let us be perfectly clear. The prenuptial agreement signed by both parties on June 12, 2015, is unequivocal. In the event of a dissolution of the marriage due to infidelity, the at-fault party forfeits all claims to shared property and is entitled to no alimony whatsoever." Greg scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a theatrical sigh. "Oh, come on. That infidelity clause is archaic. It'll never hold up in court. Who's to say who was at fault? Marriages are complicated." "Are they?" Abernathy asked, his eyes locking onto Greg's. "Because I have here a sworn affidavit from the concierge at the Mandarin Oriental detailing Mr. Stanton's weekly meetings with a Miss Jessica Thorne for the past 8 months. I have receipts from Tiffany & Co. for a diamond necklace not purchased for my client. I also have a digital forensics report from Mr. Stanton's personal laptop, the one registered as a joint marital asset, which contains a rather extensive record of his correspondence. Would you like me to read from it?" Greg's confident smirk faltered. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes before he masked it with anger. "That's an invasion of privacy. You can't use that." "We can and we will," Abernathy stated flatly. The laptop was purchased with funds from a joint account, making it marital property. The evidence is admissible, and it is damning. Finch, the high-priced lawyer, shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't expected this level of preparation. He had expected a tearful, heartbroken wife willing to pay any price to make the pain go away. He hadn't expected the legal arm of Vance Global Holdings. Now Abernathy continued sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is our counteroffer. It is also our final offer. Catherine will retain the brownstone and all its contents. She will retain 100% of the joint investment portfolio. Mr. Stanton will vacate the premises within 48 hours. He will be allowed to take his personal effects, which will be packed for him under supervision. There will be no alimony. In return for his immediate and unconditional acceptance of these terms, Catherine will agree to a non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of the divorce." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I imagine the board of the Oakhaven Development Group, a notoriously conservative bunch, might take a dim view of their new partner's moral character if certain details were to be leaked to the press. Reputational risk, I believe they call it." The threat was clear, cold, and utterly terrifying. Greg's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. He was being cornered, outmaneuvered at every turn. He looked at Catherine, expecting to see triumph in her eyes, but all he found was a deep, profound sadness. This was the man she had loved, reduced to a petty, greedy stranger. "This is because of him, isn't it?" Greg spat, his voice trembling with rage. "This is your father. You ran crying to Daddy, and he sent his pit bull to clean up your mess. You can't do anything on your own. Can you, Kate?" The insult meant to wound her barely registered. She had spent a decade trying to prove she was more than just Harrison Vance's daughter. She had built a career, a home, a life, all in an attempt to stand on her own 2 feet. And in the end, when the man she had given that life to tried to burn it all down, it was her father's power that was her shield. The irony was not lost on her. "Sign the paper, Greg," she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. "It's over. Just sign it and go." His eyes darted between Catherine Abernathy and his own lawyer, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. Finch knew they were beaten. To fight this would be to invite public humiliation and professional ruin for his client. With a hand that shook with fury, Greg snatched a pen and scrawled his signature on the document. He threw the pen down on the table, the clatter echoing in the silent room. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He pointed a finger at Catherine. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I built my company from nothing. I don't need you. I don't need your father's money. I have the Oakhaven deal. I'm still winning. You and your father. You'll see." He stormed out of the room, Finch scurrying after him. The door clicked shut, and Catherine finally let out the breath she had been holding. She felt no victory, only a hollow ache. The severance was complete. The legal ties were cut. But as Greg's final arrogant words hung in the air, she knew this was far from over. He didn't understand. He thought this was about a divorce settlement. He couldn't grasp that he hadn't just insulted Catherine Vance, the architect. He had profoundly insulted Catherine Vance, the beloved daughter of Harrison Vance. And for a man like Harrison, some insults were debts that could only be repaid in full with devastating interest. Harrison Vance's office on the 80th floor of the Vance Global building was a testament to his philosophy. Power is quiet. There were no ostentatious displays of wealth. The walls were paneled in dark, unpolished mahogany. The furniture was minimalist, a collection of Eames and Le Corbusier pieces that valued form and function over flash. The only art was a single massive Mark Rothko painting, its deep, brooding colors seeming to absorb all the sound in the room. The view, a panoramic sweep of the Manhattan skyline, was the only true decoration, a constant reminder of the world he dominated. Harrison himself was much like his office. At 72, he was lean and impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that cost more than most cars. His hair was a shock of perfectly coiffed silver, and his eyes, a piercing shade of blue, missed nothing. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace that belied the ferocious speed at which his mind worked. He was a predator who had no need to roar. His very presence was enough to silence a room. He had listened to Catherine's initial call 2 days ago, with a stillness that would have unnerved anyone who didn't know him. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply absorbed the details of his daughter's pain and Gregory Stanton's betrayal. When she finished, her voice thick with tears, he had said only 4 words: "I will handle it." Now he sat behind his vast desk, not looking at the city, but at a single tablet displaying a complex flowchart. Robert Abernathy sat opposite him, having come directly from the meeting with Greg and his lawyer. He signed. Abernathy reported his voice neutral. He was belligerent, but he signed. He will be out of the brownstone by Friday. Harrison nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the tablet. His final words: arrogant. He believes the Oakhaven deal makes him invincible. He credited himself with building his company from nothing and stated that he didn't need Catherine or her family's money. A rare, cold smile touched Harrison's lips. It did not reach his eyes. From nothing. That's a rather creative interpretation of history. He tapped the screen of his tablet. I've had my analysts at Kroll run a deep dive on Stanton Innovative Designs. A fascinating read. He swiveled the tablet for Abernathy to see. It was a detailed history of Greg's company from its inception. Seed money, Harrison said, pointing to the first entry. $500,000. The official records list it as an inheritance from a distant aunt. In reality, it was an anonymous wire transfer from a subsidiary of a Vance Global Trust, a wedding gift I made to Catherine, which she then loaned to her ambitious new husband, so he could feel like he was building something himself. He tapped the screen again. His first major contract, a boutique hotel in Soho. The developer, a Mr. Peterson, was remarkably accommodating on his terms. Coincidentally, Mr. Peterson's construction firm had a $40 million loan with Gibraltar Financial, a bank, where Vance Global holds a 19% stake. A quiet word from me to the bank's chairman ensured Mr. Peterson was receptive to the promising new architect. He continued down the list. A zoning variance that was mysteriously approved. A key supplier who extended a generous line of credit when no one else would. A negative story in the Post about a competitor that was killed at the last minute. Each step of Greg's ascent had been quietly and visibly paved with Harrison Vance's influence. Greg had been so blinded by his own ambition that he had mistaken a carefully constructed launch pad for his own innate talent. He believes he built his empire. Harrison murmured more to himself than to Abernathy. He has no idea he was merely a tenant in a building I owned all along. It is time to issue an eviction notice. Abernathy watched his boss, a man he had served for 40 years. He had seen him dismantle corporations, orchestrate hostile takeovers, and crush competitors with surgical precision. But this was different. This had a current of personal fury beneath the icy calm. This was for Catherine. "What are your instructions?" Sir Abernathy asked. Harrison's gaze finally lifted from the tablet, and the full, chilling force of his attention fixed on his lawyer. "The Oakhaven Development Group. Their financing for this project is a complex syndicate of lenders. Find the linchpin, the one lender whose withdrawal would cause a confidence cascade. By their position, we will become their primary creditor." "Understood, sir." "And Stanton's other lines of credit. Stanton Innovative Designs is leveraged to the hilt," Harrison said, his voice dropping. He used projected earnings from the Oakhaven deal to secure a massive expansion loan from Gibraltar Financial, the very bank we helped him with years ago. "I had a conversation with Chairman Reynolds this morning. A very pleasant chat. We discussed risk management. I expressed my concern about overexposure to the volatile commercial real estate sector. Gibraltar will be calling in his loan, citing a material adverse change clause. The full amount will be due in 30 days. 30 days. It was a death sentence for a company like Greg's. His suppliers, Abernathy prompted. Most of his material contracts are with subsidiaries of the All-State Materials Group. As you know, our pension fund is their largest institutional investor. They will be informed that, due to a strategic review, all credit terms with Stanton Innovative Designs are revoked. Payment will be required up front for all future orders, immediately. The strategy was brutally elegant. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a systemic strangulation. Harrison wasn't just going to knock Greg down. He was going to dismantle the entire ecosystem that supported him piece by piece until there was nothing left but air. "And what about Miss Thorne?" Abernathy inquired. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. "The secretary. She is a symptom, not the disease. She is drawn to power and money. When those are gone, she will vanish like the morning mist. She is beneath my notice." His focus was solely on Greg. The boy's arrogance is his fatal flaw. He flew close to the sun, believing he had built his own wings. He is about to discover they were made of borrowed feathers. And I am recalling the loan. He stood up and walked to the vast window, clasping his hands behind his back as he looked down at the city below. He saw it not as a collection of buildings and people, but as a complex network of power, influence, and debt. A system he knew how to manipulate better than anyone alive. "He hurt my daughter." "Robert Harrison," said his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He took her love and her loyalty. And he treated them like disposable assets. He thought my family's name was a tool for him to use. He is about to learn that it can also be a weapon of unimaginable weight." Down below, somewhere in that concrete jungle, Gregory Stanton was probably celebrating toasting his freedom and his bright future with his mistress. He was blissfully unaware that a silent, patient predator perched high above the city had just marked him as prey. The hunt had begun. The first tremor hit on a Tuesday. Greg was in a meeting with his senior design team, mapping out the initial phases of the Oakhaven project. He was on top of the world. The divorce was a minor annoyance, a footnote in his grand ascent. He had Jessica by his side. He'd even promoted her to Chief Operating Officer, a title that came with a corner office and a staggering salary. He felt liberated, powerful, and unstoppable. Then his phone buzzed. It was his CFO, a perpetually nervous man named David Chen. You need to see this, David said, his voice tight with anxiety. Now. Greg excused himself from the meeting and strode to David's office. On the screen was an email from the Oakhaven Development Group. It was a terse, formal notice, citing unforeseen shifts in their financing structure. They were putting the project on indefinite hold. What the hell does that mean? Greg demanded. We have a contract. It means they're pulling out. David said, his face pale. The contract has a termination clause, Article 7B. If their primary financing is withdrawn, they can dissolve the agreement with a penalty payment. The penalty is a fraction of what the project is worth. Greg felt a jolt of cold fear. Their financing was solid. It was with a consortium led by Deutsche Bank. Was David stressed? According to my source, a private equity firm, Blackwood Capital, bought out Deutsche Bank's position last week. They then declared the terms of the loan unacceptable and withdrew the funding. The whole consortium collapsed. Blackwood Capital. Greg frowned. I've never even heard of them. They're new, but they're aggressive. Rumor is they're a front for a much bigger player. A bigger player. The words echoed ominously in Greg's mind. He spent the rest of the day on the phone, yelling at lawyers and contacts at Oakhaven, but it was like punching a ghost. The decision was final. The deal that was supposed to make him a legend was gone. The next day, the second tremor hit. It was a call from Mark Reynolds, the chairman of Gibraltar Financial. Greg had golfed with him. He considered him a friend. Greg, my boy. Terrible news. Reynolds said, his voice oozing a practiced, insincere sympathy. The board had a risk assessment meeting. Given the collapse of the Oakhaven deal, we're seeing a material adverse change in your company's financial outlook. We have to call in the $20 million expansion loan. As per the covenant, it's due in 30 days. The phone felt slick in Greg's sweating palm. 30 days. Mark, you can't be serious. That's impossible. My hands are tied. Greg, the board is spooked. You know how it is. Greg didn't know how it was. He had never been on this side of the phone call before. He had always been the one in favor, the one whose risks were underwritten. Now, suddenly, he was a liability. The tremors were becoming an earthquake. He called his suppliers at Allstate Materials Group to arrange the steel and concrete for a smaller ongoing project. The purchasing manager, a man who had been whining and dining him for years, was suddenly cold and formal. I'm sorry, Mr. Stanton. Our corporate policy has changed. All future orders with your firm will require 100% payment up front via wire transfer before we can process them. Up front. We have a net 60 credit line with you. Greg roared. That credit line has been suspended effective immediately. I'm sorry. It's a decision from corporate. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at Greg's throat. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a market downturn. This was a coordinated attack. One by one, the pillars holding up his business were being kicked out from under him. The Oakhaven deal, his bank financing his supply chain, all gone within 48 hours. He retreated to his office, the grand space he had designed as a monument to his own success. It now felt like a tomb. Jessica came in her usual confident swagger, replaced by a nervous energy. Greg, what's going on? She asked, her voice high-pitched. My new company, Amex, was just declined. The company accounts are frozen. It's a temporary cash flow problem. He snapped, running his hands through his hair. I'm handling it. But he wasn't handling it. He was drowning. He spent the next week frantically calling every financial institution and private investor he knew, trying to secure a bridge loan to pay back Gibraltar. The answer was always the same: a polite but firm no. It was as if a memo had gone out across Wall Street. Gregory Stanton is poison. His carefully curated network of friends and contacts evaporated. Calls went unreturned. Invitations to lunch were politely declined. The men who had clapped him on the back and called him a genius a week ago all looked through him at industry events. Jessica's support began to curdle into resentment. The shopping sprees stopped. The lavish dinners were replaced by tense nights eating takeout in the half-empty brownstone. Catherine's things were gone packed and removed with ruthless efficiency, leaving sterile, empty spaces that mocked him. "You promised me we were going to the top, Greg," Jessica said one evening, her voice sharp with accusation as she looked at a past-due bill for her new Mercedes. "This doesn't feel like the top. This feels like a sinking ship." "I just need more time," he insisted, his desperation palpable. "Someone is doing this to me. This is a targeted attack." "Who would do this?" she scoffed. "You're not that important, Greg." But as she said it, a chilling thought, a memory surfaced in Greg's mind. He remembered Abernathy's calm, cold eyes in the conference room. He remembered Catherine's quiet sadness, and he remembered his own arrogant parting shot. "You and your father. You'll see." He had thought it was a threat he was making to them. What if it was a prophecy about himself? He stumbled to his desk and pulled up a financial news terminal. He typed in Blackwood Capital, the mysterious firm that had torpedoed his deal. There wasn't much information, just a registered address in Delaware and a list of managing partners he didn't recognize. He started cross-referencing the partners' names. One of them, a John C. Riley, had previously served on the board of a biotech company. He dug deeper. That biotech company had been acquired 3 years ago by Vance Global Holdings. The blood drained from his face. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a signature. He then searched for Allstate Materials Group's largest investors. The top of the list was the Vance Global Employee Pension Fund. Finally, he looked up the board of directors for Gibraltar Financial. 3 of the 12 members had direct ties to companies within the Vance global empire. It was all connected. Harrison Vance. It wasn't a loud, angry declaration of war. It was a silent, systematic execution. Harrison hadn't come at him with a sword. He had simply made a few quiet phone calls, pulled a few invisible levers, and re-engineered Greg's reality. He had cut off the oxygen and was now just waiting for him to suffocate. Greg stared at the screen, the intricate web of connections, spelling out his doom. His company wasn't a house of cards because it was weak. It was a house of cards because Harrison Vance had owned the table it was built on the entire time. And now he was simply quietly clearing it off. The final 30 days of Gregory Stanton's professional life were a masterclass in psychological torture. Every morning brought a fresh hell. Valued employees, smelling the blood in the water, began to tender their resignations. Subcontractors filed liens against his projects for non-payment. The IRS sent a notice of an impending audit. The edifice of his success was not just cracking. It was being pulverized into dust, and he was trapped inside. He became a ghost, haunting the halls of his own company. He stopped sleeping, fueled by a toxic cocktail of caffeine and terror. He lost weight, his expensive suits hanging loosely on his gaunt frame. The charismatic, confident man who had charmed clients and seduced his secretary was gone, replaced by a paranoid, hollow-eyed wreck. Jessica, predictably, was the first rat to leave the sinking ship. She packed her things one afternoon, while he was desperately trying to renegotiate terms with a furious concrete supplier. He came back to her office to find it empty, save for a single sheet of paper on the desk. It was her resignation. No goodbye, no explanation. She had just vanished another ghost in his rapidly collapsing world. He later heard she'd taken a job with his biggest competitor, no doubt using the proprietary information she'd gleaned from him as her signing bonus. The day of the reckoning arrived with a cold grey drizzle that mirrored the state of Greg's soul. It was the deadline for the Gibraltar financial loan repayment. He was sitting in his office, staring at a bank balance that was less than his monthly mortgage, when his assistant at temp, the only one he could afford, told him a Mr. Abernathy was here to see him. Greg's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a surge of pure, impotent rage. He straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, and walked out to the reception area, determined to face his executioner with some semblance of dignity. Robert Abernathy stood by the window looking out at the rain-streaked city. He was the same calm, immovable figure from the divorce meeting. He turned as Greg approached, his expression neutral. "Mr. Stanton," he said, his voice polite. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want?" Greg snarled. "Have you come to dance on the grave?" "Not at all," Abernathy replied smoothly. "I am here on behalf of a client who has recently acquired your debt from Gibraltar Financial. As you have defaulted on the payment, my client is now the primary lien holder on all assets of Stanton Innovative Designs, including its intellectual property, ongoing contracts, and all physical property." Greg stared at him, uncomprehending. "Your client? Who?" "It seems your company is officially bankrupt," Abernathy continued, ignoring the question. "A sad day. However, my client saw an opportunity. They have purchased the company lock, stock, and barrel from the receivers. For pennies on the dollar, I might add." The rage in Greg's chest was replaced by a creeping, icy dread. "Who bought my company?" he whispered. Abernathy allowed himself a small, thin smile. The new owner felt it was important to oversee the transition personally. "She is waiting for you in your old office." "She..." The word hung in the air. Suddenly, Greg couldn't feel his legs. He stumbled past Abernathy, his mind refusing to process the implication. He pushed open the door to his office, the room that had been the center of his universe. And there she was. Catherine Vance was standing by his desk, not looking at him, but at the blueprints for the Oakhaven project, which were still tacked to the wall. She was not the heartbroken, tear-streaked woman he had left behind. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue power suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek, professional style. She radiated a quiet confidence and an authority he had never seen in her before. She looked powerful. She looked like her father. She turned to face him, her eyes calm and clear. There was no hatred in them, no anger. Just a cool, dispassionate assessment that was somehow more terrifying than any rage. "Hello, Greg," she said, her voice even. "Kate, what is this?" "What have you done?" he stammered. "Me." She raised an eyebrow. "I haven't done anything. I've been busy. I started my own firm. It's called Foundations. We focus on sustainable urban renewal. It's very rewarding." She gestured around the office. "This, however, is my father's work. A little side project of his. He can be very sentimental about family." Greg sank into one of the visitors' chairs, the fight finally draining out of him completely. "He ruined me." "No," Catherine said, her voice firm. "You ruined yourself, Greg. My father just removed the safety nets you never knew you had. He took away the invisible advantages, the favorable loans, the friendly suppliers. He made you stand on your own 2 feet, and you just collapsed. It turns out the empire you built was nothing more than a subsidized fantasy. She walked over to the wall and calmly began taking down the Oakhaven blueprints, rolling them up with practiced ease. What are you going to do with the company? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. We're dissolving it, she said simply. We'll sell off the physical assets, the computers, the furniture. The name Stanton Innovative Designs will cease to exist. Its contracts will be absorbed by other, more stable firms. It will be as if it never was. It was the ultimate erasure. Not just bankruptcy, but complete and total annihilation. His name, his legacy, all of it gone. Why, Kate? He pleaded, a pathetic edge to his voice. Why go this far? She finally looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the woman he had married, a flash of the pain he had caused her. You asked me once what my little hobby was worth, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You dismissed my work, my passion, my very identity as something quaint and unimportant. You built your entire world on the idea that you were the success and I was the accessory. She paused, letting the words sink in. My father did this because you hurt his daughter. But I am here, Greg, to show you the result, to make you understand. This is my reckoning. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. This is what happens when you try to tear down a woman who knows how to build things that last. She tucked the rolled-up blueprints under her arm and walked toward the door, pausing beside his chair. Abernathy will show you out, she said, not unkindly, but with a finality that was absolute. The security guards have a box with your personal effects from the desk. Goodbye, Greg. And with that, she was gone. Greg sat there, a broken man in the ruins of his life, listening to the sound of Catherine Vance's heels clicking down the hallway, the sound of her walking away, not just from him, but into her own future. A future she was now building on the ashes of his. The reckoning was complete. While Gregory Stanton's world was imploding, Catherine Vance was meticulously building a new one. The first few weeks after the divorce were a blur of grief and disorientation. She wandered the empty rooms of the brownstone, each space a repository of memories now tainted by betrayal. For a decade, her identity had been intertwined with his. She was Greg's wife. Now, in the hollow silence, she was forced to ask herself a question she had long ignored. Who was Catherine Vance? Her friend, Olivia, was her rock, showing up with takeout wine and a refusal to let Catherine wallow. He was a fool, Kate, Olivia said one night, as they sat on the floor of the cavernous living room. He saw a beautiful handcrafted vase and complained it wasn't a megaphone. His loss. It was Olivia who pushed her back into her work. That Pritzker nomination wasn't a fluke, she insisted. You have a gift. Use it. Build something for yourself. Literally. The idea took root. For years she had sublimated her own ambitions to support Greg's. His projects were always bigger, flashier, more important. Her focus on green materials, community spaces, and affordable, beautiful housing had been a quiet passion, something he'd tolerated rather than celebrated. Now there was nothing holding her back. She converted a spare wing of the brownstone into a design studio, trading expensive furniture for drafting tables and corkboard walls. She called her new firm Foundations Architecture, a name that was both a professional statement and a personal mantra. She would build things that were strong, honest, and designed to last. Her first move was to call her father, not for money, but for advice. "I'm starting my own firm," she told him, her voice steady and determined. Harrison Vance was silent for a moment on the other end of the line. When he spoke, there was a deep pride in his voice. "Good. What do you need?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "I don't want a handout, Dad. I need to do this myself. But I would like to pitch for the old Docklands redevelopment project. The one the City Council has been trying to get off the ground for years." It was a notoriously difficult project, mired in bureaucracy and community opposition. Most major firms wouldn't touch it. It was exactly the kind of challenge Catherine craved. "I will make sure your proposal is seen by the right people," Harrison said. "The rest is up to you." She poured everything into the proposal. She didn't just design buildings, she designed a community. She incorporated public gardens, a subsidized artists' co-op low-impact construction methods, and a beautiful modern library, funded by a grant she researched and applied for herself. She spent weeks meeting with community leaders, listening to their concerns, and incorporating their feedback into her designs. She wasn't just an architect imposing a vision. She was a collaborator. When she presented her plan to the City Council, she was no longer the quiet, unassuming woman who had stood in her husband's shadow. She was passionate, articulate, and brilliant. She spoke about creating a legacy not of glass and steel, but of community and belonging. She won the contract. It was a massive victory, one she had earned entirely on her own merit. The news sent a ripple through the architectural world. Foundations. Architecture. The new firm on the block had landed the unlandable project. Work became her therapy and her salvation. She hired a small, dedicated team of young, bright architects who shared her vision. Her studio became a vibrant hub of creativity and collaboration, a stark contrast to the toxic, ego-driven environment at Stanton Innovative Designs. She was in her element, doing the work she was born to do. She was happy. It was a deep, resilient happiness she hadn't felt in years. It was 3 months after she had last seen Greg that their paths crossed one final time. She was on site at the Docklands, overseeing the initial groundwork when she saw him. He was working as part of the demolition crew, a subcontractor hired by the main construction company. He was thin-weathered and almost unrecognizable in a hard hat and a dirty safety vest. The Brioni suits and Patek Philippe watch were gone, replaced by worn-out jeans and calloused hands. He saw her at the same time. His face flushed with shame, and he quickly turned away, hoping she hadn't noticed. But she had. Catherine felt a pang, not of pity, but of a strange, distant closure. This was the reality of his empire. Without her father's invisible hand, this was where his own talent and ambition had led him. She walked over her own hard hat, firmly in place. The crew boss saw her coming and immediately grew deferential. "Ms. Vance, everything to your satisfaction." "Everything's fine, Bill," she said, her eyes on Greg's back. "I was just wondering about that man over there. Is his work satisfactory?" Bill squinted. "Stanton. Yeah, he's okay. Grumbles a lot, but he shows up on time. Bit of a know-it-all for a guy swinging a sledgehammer, though." Catherine simply nodded. She could have had him fired. One word from her, and he would be gone. The thought flickered and died. There was no point. The war was over. She had already won. She walked away without another word. She didn't need revenge. Her success, her happiness, her thriving new life, that was the only statement that mattered. She was Catherine Vance, the architect, a builder, a creator. She was a phoenix who had not just risen from the ashes of a failed marriage, but had used those very ashes to fertilize the ground for a brilliant new beginning. As she looked out over the sprawling construction site at the foundation of the new community she was creating, she knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. 2 years later, the Vance Global Holdings annual charity gala was in full swing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The grand hall was filled with the city's elite financiers, politicians, artists, and philanthropists. At the center of it all, standing beside her father, was Catherine Vance. She was no longer just Harrison Vance's daughter. She was a luminary in her own right. Foundations. Architecture was the most talked about firm in the city. The Docklands project, now nearing completion, was being hailed as a masterpiece of urban renewal, a model for cities around the world. It had won her a slew of awards, and this time no one dared call it a fluke. Catherine had become a powerful voice in her field, sought after for her innovative ideas and her unwavering integrity. She moved through the glittering crowd with an easy grace and a confidence that was born not of privilege, but of achievement. She wasn't the timid woman who had once shrunk from the spotlight. She was a woman who had built her own stage and was now comfortably commanding it. Her father watched her, a rare, genuine smile on his face. Their relationship had transformed. The protective, distant billionaire had become a mentor and a confidant. He saw her not as a fragile daughter to be shielded, but as a brilliant successor, a different kind of titan who built with compassion instead of ruthlessness. He had torn down Greg's world to protect her, but she had built her own world through her own strength. Later in the evening, as she was speaking with the mayor about a new public housing initiative, Robert Abernathy approached her quietly. "Catherine," he said with a respectful nod, "I thought you might be interested to know. Gregory Stanton was officially released from his bankruptcy protection last week. All debts settled, though he remains, for all intents and purposes, destitute." "And what is he doing now?" she asked, her curiosity clinical rather than emotional. "He is working as a draftsman for a small firm in New Jersey," Abernathy reported. "Low-level work. He designs strip malls and parking garages. Apparently his name is so toxic in the New York architectural community that it's the only work he could find." Catherine pictured it for a moment. Greg, the man who dreamed of gleaming skyscrapers, now hunched over a desk drawing parking space dimensions. There was a certain cosmic justice to it. He who had looked down on her little hobby was now engaged in the most soulless, anonymous work their field had to offer. And Miss Thorne, she found herself asking. She lasted 6 months at the competitor's firm before being let go for performance issues, Abernathy said with a hint of satisfaction. "Last I heard, she was a real estate agent in Westchester, a very competitive market." They were footnotes in a book she had long since finished reading. Their fates were no longer her concern. Her gaze drifted across the hall, landing on the lead engineer for her Docklands project, a kind, intelligent man named David Chen, the same CFO who had worked for Greg. She had hired him after Stanton Innovative Designs collapsed, seeing his talent and integrity. They had bonded over long nights working on the project, and a gentle, respectful romance had begun to bloom. He caught her eye and smiled a warm, genuine smile that held no agenda, only affection. She smiled back, a feeling of profound peace settling over her. Her life was full, not just with success, but with purpose, respect, and the promise of a love built on a true foundation of partnership. She had survived the betrayal and the heartbreak. She had emerged from the wreckage, not just intact, but stronger, truer to herself than ever before. Gregory Stanton had tried to demolish her life, But he had failed to understand a fundamental principle of architecture, a principle she now embodied. You can't destroy a structure by attacking its facade. Real strength, lasting strength, comes from the integrity of the foundation. And her foundation, built of self-respect, passion, and the unshakable love of her family, was and always would be unbreakable. She had not only rebuilt her life, she had created a stunning, enduring masterpiece. Catherine's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most powerful allies, and that true wealth isn't in a bank account, but in self-respect and integrity. Gregory Stanton learned that lesson the hard way, losing everything because he underestimated the woman he betrayed. He saw her as an accessory to his success, forgetting she was the daughter of the man who had silently engineered that success all along. From the ashes of a devastating betrayal, Catherine didn't just get revenge. She rediscovered her purpose and built an empire of her own, on her own terms. What did you think of Harrison Vance's epic silent revenge? Was it justified, or did it go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable tales of karma and consequence. Your support helps us bring these stories to life,